Welcome to Crime Survivors Speak podcast. My name is Aswad Thomas. I'm the National Director of Crime Survivors Speak. We are a national network of over 200,000 crime victims and survivors from across the country. I know many of you have, but if you haven't already subscribed to stay up to date on the latest episodes, you can do that on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming platforms by clicking on the link in the caption or email. Today, I'm here with another amazing individual. I will probably say one of my favorite human beings in this world, someone who I've got to work with these past few years, someone who I got to organize with and change a lot of laws across this country, the one and only Juan Pablo Chavez. Juan Pablo Chavez is a longtime community organizer with more than 2 decades of experience building power in Latino and faith communities, underserved communities, communities of color, and also playing a key role in uplifting the voices of crime survivors. Juan Pablo is currently our Crime Survivors Speak organizing director, leading our work in Florida and now in Illinois, where he helps to organize survivors and help to turn their stories into collective action. That includes shaping policies that prioritize healing, accountability, leadership development, and also real safety. Juan Pablo's work bridges faith, culture, and community power. Today, he joins us to talk about what it means for survivors to lead a movement for change. Juan Pablo, welcome to the Crime Survivors Speak podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for this amazing invitation.
Awesome. Juan Pablo, over the years, I've heard you often say, as survivors, we are called to this work. When did you first feel that calling to advocacy, and what did it mean to recognize yourself as a survivor?
What a great question. LA, California, I remember I was 16 years old, making a phone call to my mom from a public phone when I felt a gun in my back. So when I woke up, I was bleeding. And a few days later, I got a call from a detective asking if I was willing to identify the suspects. Every interaction was more traumatic than helpful. No one asked me, "Are you okay? How can we help you? Do you feel safe?" Years later, I moved to Chicago and I became a victim again. I remember one day in my church, and we were reflecting, that God saves. And I said, yeah, I know God saves, but I don't feel safe in my neighborhood. I don't feel safe in the streets. Can we talk about saved versus safe? And I felt called to do something within my church. And that's when I realized that I was a survivor. That's when I realized that something was happening, and I felt called to advocacy. I felt called to bring real solutions, especially when I met Crime Survivors Speak. I say, wow, this is the right organization. This is the right instrument to make a change. There is no support for survivors. So after the realization that there was no representation for the most vulnerable, the most forgotten people, I said, this is the time, this is the instrument. And as a survivor, I was thinking, why we don't organize to empower ourselves, to share our stories, and elevating our voices will make public policy change.
Thank you for sharing that, Juan Pablo. Take us back, walk us through your first organizing in Chicago in your early days of organizing decades ago.
Well, it was in 1998. I was in Chicago and I was in this conversation with a pastor talking about saved versus safe. And I said, we don't feel safe in the streets. And he said, well, there is a group of people that are trying to do something. So he introduced me with a ceasefire. And I came to a meeting and they invited me to work with them, to be in the streets, to coordinate a ceasefire in the South Side, to respond to when a shooting happened, to help people, to do a prayer vigil, to organize the streets, to invite the community to do something.
Wow. So you've been organizing since 1998, starting in the local community, helping survivors, helping families and communities host prayer vigils, and also providing them opportunity to get involved, to do something in their neighborhood. Through your work, you spent more than 2 decades organizing in communities and Latino communities as well, which often face barriers most people never see, from language access to the fear of interacting with systems. I'm curious, JP, how do these realities shape the way survivors experience trauma and seek justice? And what can Latino and immigrants communities teach us about how to get creative in our organizing?
Yes, let me start with barriers most people never see. One of the biggest barriers is the trauma, especially the trauma that immigrants experience when they immigrate to USA. And that's something that people don't see, okay? The other thing is immigrants don't put their lives at risk for trivial reasons. Can you imagine crossing the borders for 3 to 10 days, walking under extreme weather conditions, swimming across rivers, walking for up to 30 days in the desert, surviving human trafficking? They don't do all this to come and meet Mickey Mouse. No. There is push and pull factors that push immigrants to leave the countries, and factors that pull them also. So let me tell you this. I've been doing trainings and talking with a lot of people, but 90% of a typical American don't know who is their local, county, and state representative. They don't know. They don't know who's their city elected officials. They don't know the county commissioners. They don't know their senators. So if they don't know who is the local public officials, they don't understand the international laws and agreements that push and pull immigrants. Just to give you a few examples, NAFTA, or CAFTA, TLC, USMCA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement that was signed in 1994, in 2020, those agreements basically pull immigrants to this country. And that's a trauma. Let me give you one example, okay? NAFTA, it was an agreement that subsidized corn in USA. So when the corn was subsidized, for example, in Oaxaca, Mexico, okay, they opened a big company of corn. So all the small businesses had to close. They couldn't compete with prices that were half prices of the Mexican prices compared with USA. So what happened with that situation? A family who owned a shop, they closed because the large company can produce more than them and can distribute nationwide. So what happened with those 2,000 farm workers? They had to emigrate to USA. That's one of the challenges, one of the things that are not seen, okay? Another one is that immigrants face multiple challenges, trauma, and also seeking justice. They don't trust authorities because immigrants have been deported because they work with no documents. That's sad, but we never talk about deporting corporations who hire them. We never talk about the companies. There is a big need of labor, but the companies look for cheap labor. And we don't talk about punishing them. We don't talk about deporting them. Who gets the trauma? The immigrants, when they need help. But we don't talk about those issues.
Thanks, JP. I heard some of the biggest barriers people face in their own countries, like Mexico. One of the barriers is trauma. There are factors that push people from their beloved home countries to places like the United States, and often is a result of violence. What you shared is important for our listeners to research on how these agreements, as you mentioned, like NAFTA, the big corporations coming in and impacting the local businesses, local families as well. And also the challenges that so many people face with just seeking justice and getting support from the justice system, but also recognizing a lot of people don't trust authorities. And I think that's been consistent for decades. And here we are today, Juan Pablo. Today, immigrant communities more and more these days are living with that daily fear. We have ICE raids, family separations, detentions, and deportations. You've been working on the ground across the state of Illinois. You've been on the ground across the state of Florida. What are you hearing from survivors in those communities about how this current political climate and the ICE raids and the family separations, how is that affecting their sense of safety and their ability to seek help? How do we begin to rebuild trust in spaces where justice has never felt safe for so many people?
Wow, I have heard everything, but something that really touched me is that ICE was outside of a funeral in Chicago. Can you imagine not being able to go to a funeral, to give the final love to your loved ones? Not being able to go to church and pray for your family? This is inhumane. This is insane. Of course, there is no trust in the system. I have noticed that even all these situations are happening, people are praying a lot. When I meet with a survivor for lunch, for a meeting, for a chapter meeting, I learned how people are praying. So they see crime survivors speak as the promised land. As an answer, we have this opportunity to share together. The conversation is about faith, conviction, public policy, values. It's about organizing, and it's about our values, our conviction, our faith cannot be deported.
Wow, Juan Pablo, I have chills hearing you share how people see Crime Survivors Speak as that promised land, as that opportunity to connect and build. As you just talked about, your faith, you draw deeply from faith traditions in your work. How has faith shaped your understanding of justice, especially for communities who are criminalized or targeted simply for who they are?
What a good question. God is a God of justice. God is a God of relationship. And when you have a relationship with God, you will be an instrument for justice. I like a phrase that I heard: if you want peace, work for justice. God is a God who always gives you peace, but never leave you in peace. In other words, God gives you peace, but never lets you to stay comfortable. He always wants you to work for justice. And the Bible is full of examples, because the Bible is not just a book, it's a manual that is leading you to justice. Just look, Prophet Nehemiah. He's the organizing expert in chapter 5. Micah 6:8, what the Lord requires to do justice, to be merciful and to be humble. It doesn't matter what faith you profess, we are called to justice, to shape the economic, religious, and political system. And also by faith, I learned what God intended for the world, for the city where you live, but also what went wrong. And also my role, my responsibility to respond, to make changes. I love Prophet Nehemiah. Prophet Nehemiah in chapter 5 is the manual for organizer. He heard the cry of the people when the wives were exploited and when the sons and daughters were sexually exploited. He organized the people, met with public officials, and said, we have to change this. He was extremely upset of the complaints, but he organized the people and he sat down with the public officials face to face, and he brought the changes that we have to make, and they agreed to do it. And everybody said, amen. This is a manual. We need to hear the pain of the people, organize the people, bring them to public officials, bring specific changes that will benefit the people, and we need to engage them to say amen. So my faith plays a significant role working for justice.
Thank you, JP. And it's my faith that continued to drive me to do the work, which isn't easy work at all. And Juan Pablo, there are people who are listening that may not know the power that they have. I recall you sharing a story around a waitress and their interaction with a public official at a restaurant related to butter. Would love for you to share that story so people can hear the power that you actually have.
I can share the story. It was a banquet. There were state representatives and senators of the United States. One of the senators said to the waitress, excuse me, Waitress, could I get 2 bowls of butter? And the waitress said, no, sir, just one. The senator said, do you know who I am? The waitress said, yes, I know who you are. You are a senator of the United States. I'm asking for 2 bowls of butter. The waitress said, but do you know who I am? Of course I know who you are. You're a waitress. Yes, I am the waitress, but I am who controls the butter. So you get only one. And that's what I tell people, we control the butters. We are the people who vote. We are the people who elect public officials. We are controlling the butter, and we shouldn't let others to control the butter. We are called to organize our people and vote.
I'm excited for others just to hear that brief story about the power that we have as voters, as community members, to hold our elected officials accountable. Through our work over the years, I've seen you engage with hundreds and thousands of survivors across the country. You often talk about survivors being architects of healing. What does that look like in practice, and how has that role shaped your leadership in organizing?
Wow, that's a good question. First of all, to be an architect requires a lot of skills. And to heal also, the role of immigrants, the role of leaders, the role of survivors in the country is very significant. Immigrants in general, we take the most difficult jobs in the country. For example, agricultural work, extremely long hours and intense heat, pesticides exposure, construction, working on the roofs, heavy physical labor, housekeeping, landscaping. Here in Florida, being outside all day in the heat or raining. But if you drive around the country, you will see in any market the produce. You will see the oranges, the tomatoes, the onions. You will see the buildings, construction, the roofs. You will see housekeeping, the hotels, the restaurants, landscaping. You will see factories. All that was built by architects of healing. People that have been traumatized, people that we have healed, and we are transforming our reality, making changes every place we are. That's what I call architects of healing.
And as an architect, it takes skills, and also healing takes skills as well. So thank you for sharing, JP. We got to patent that phrase, architects of healing, one day. And JP, your insight, your expertise and experience spanning decades, you've worked on organizing and advocacy campaigns at the neighborhood level, at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. You've been a part of many movements, many grassroots campaigns as well. I'm curious to hear from you and your experience organizing for decades. What do you see as the biggest difference between grassroots survivor organizing and national movement building? And how do those two organizing spaces strengthen each other?
First of all, this is interesting because I remember in the 90s, we used to organize only locally in the southwest of Chicago, and then in the north, west, east side. But then we noticed, hold on, the issues are statewide. But now I see the main difference is the issues are nationwide. And both complement each other. The local changes are the result of macro level advocacy. And the macro level changes are because the advocacy that we do nationwide. So we need both. We need to work together, because when we organize locally, we can make an impact nationwide.
Thanks, JP. For the past few months, you've been doing a lot of local organizing, right, in Illinois. And also in Florida, you've been helping organize survivors at the local level to join delegation meetings in their communities. Can you tell us about the importance of survivors engaging in local meetings with public officials, but also what has been the impact that you've seen from survivors and also from elected officials engaging in those local delegation meetings within their communities?
Well, the public hearings is when the public officials get together once a year to listen what matters to people. So when they see our people talking about life issues that matter to us, they respond and say, wow, I didn't know that you were impacted by a crime. I didn't know you were impacted by domestic violence, by gun violence, by issues. So that creates an impact locally. And also, it's not just an impact, creates a relationship. They see you. When we talk about safety, we need you in our table. We need to talk to you when we talk about safety. When we talk about solutions, we need to invite survivors to sit down with us and think together about solutions.
So those listening, it's important to elevate your voice at the local level and also at the state capitol. And just as it's important to elevate your voice, the importance of building relationships with elected officials that represent and weigh in and make decisions on the issues that matter to you and your family the most. Juan Pablo, it's always a pleasure watching you organize in local communities and bringing hundreds of survivors to state capitals. In Florida, you've helped pass major legislation in the state over the years, going back to 2019, where you led the organizing effort to change the state's victim compensation program. Back in 2020, when COVID hit, you started to help advocate for more funding for community-based organizations. Just a few years ago, you led the organizing effort, organizing parents who've lost loved ones to homicide and crime victims to help pass Curtis Law in Florida back in 2023. You also been playing a crucial role in elevating survivors' voices and passing criminal justice reforms in Florida. Thank you for your leadership, helping to pass a lot of bills in the state of Florida. You've helped to do that work in Florida. You're building such a strong network in Illinois, continue to grow our work there, and you have continued to inspire change in other states as well. For survivors who hear about the policy that you've helped pass or want to get involved in policy changes, for those survivors who have never stepped a foot in their Capitol building before, what helps build trust between survivors and lawmakers within legislative visits, bringing survivors and elected officials together?
Let me tell you this. First of all, sharing the story helps a lot. When we passed all these bills, it was impressive. I remember when I saw people coming from all over the state. One bus, 9 hours on the road. It was extremely impactful. I knew something big was going to happen. I remember when we were in the rotunda, I imagined the Israelites marching with energy, happiness from Egypt towards to the promised land. And I saw the survivors seeing Tallahassee, the capital, as the promised land. We are here asking for freedom, asking for liberation, asking for new policies. The voice of the survivors, the most hurt people, being elevated in the Senate and the House at the same time. It was like a flower that bloomed from the pain to the action to create a legacy, to bring an echo of their pain that remains in the building and make public policy and make changes. And also survivors meeting with public officials, sharing our stories. It was beautiful. The image that I have is crime survivors speak is the instrument for the promised land for people.
What is one thing that you're looking forward to the most next year, given the political climate that we live in, given the impact on funding, given the funding cuts?
I've been meeting survivors from Homestead, Florida City, West Palm Beach, Miami, Belle Glade, Orlando, Jacksonville, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Naples, all over the state, all kinds of survivors from gun violence, domestic violence, sexual assault. The common denominator is, I want to heal, but I don't know where. So the policy that will make the difference will be a trauma recovery center where people can heal locally with therapeutic services. That's what we need.
And we've already established one TRC in Florida, and we know we're looking forward to advocating for more TRCs and bringing more support and services to communities in Florida, and also continue to expand our trauma recovery centers in the state of Illinois. And JP, my last question, what words or advice would you give to someone that's interested in a career in community organizing?
Just do it. This is the most beautiful career to make the difference, to empower people, to make real changes, to bring real solutions. If you feel called to do it, just do it. God is a God of justice, and God doesn't have preferences. But if God wouldn't have preferences, it will be the most harm, the most forgotten people. And we are here to help the most harmed people with Crime Survivors Speak.
And when survivors speak,
change happens.
Change happens. And Juan Pablo, a lot of change has happened because of your leadership. You've helped thousands of people all across this country. Crime Survivors Speak wouldn't be where we are today without your leadership, without your partnership, without your vision, without your expertise, but most importantly, without the way that you care about people. And it's been such a pleasure working with you. I'm excited all that we have in store. So thank you so much, Juan Pablo. It's always been a pleasure talking with you, working with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on today's podcast episode. If you are listening out there, if you want to become a member of Crime Survivors Speak, you can go to our new website, which is crimesurvivorspeak.org. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. You also can join a chapter. If you are interested in organizing, just do it. There is a community out there for you. And if you have a calling, we welcome you to help make change in your community. If you are in Florida, join the Florida chapter. If you are in Illinois, we have 3 chapters across the state. Juan Pablo leads our organizing work in Florida and Illinois. If you are in other states, please feel free to join this amazing community of survivors and leaders across the country. Remember to stay in tune with all our podcast episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming platforms. I'm excited what we have together in store for 2026.